the term. To unpack what's happening in Zimbabwe and Cameroon, we're joined by Afro expert advocate Tapua Diamond. Advocate Diamond, we thank you very much for giving us some of your Saturday afternoon. We'll start off with Zimbabwe. It seems as though as soon as our northern neighbor looks as though they're getting it together, they're faced with the same problems that they have been since economic meltdown in the early 2000s.
Well, thank you very much for having me. What we have seen happening in Zimbabwe is that last year in November, there's just been a change of personnel in terms of the leadership only. But the regime that Robert Mugabe and the ideology that Robert Mugabe brought into Zimbabwe has never changed. We have seen that in the past elections, the opposition party raised issues in terms of the fact that elections were rigged, that they're not free and fair. And to cement that, the opposition parties also say that they have got the solutions to the economic crisis in the country, in Zimbabwe. As we see now, ZANU-PF has got an egg on its face. They cannot resolve the economic crisis in Zimbabwe. Queues are everywhere. There's no petrol in Zimbabwe. There's no food. There's a lot of shortages in the country. So it goes on to say that probably there is a need for a GNU so as to benefit the people in the country.
What are the actual hopes of Emmerson Mnangagwa's current administration in solving any of the problems? If, like you're saying, I mean, we're seeing these visuals of long snaking queues, you're only allowed to put 20 litres of fuel in when you eventually get to the front of the queue, and we're also seeing all of a great deal of shops not being able to stock the most basic of items. So when you're faced with a situation like this, Emmerson Mnangagwa, you also have a country whose vaults are all but empty. What do you actually do?
Pitting the hopes of the resuscitation of the economic crisis of Zimbabwe on ZANU-PF and Emmerson Mnangagwa is mistakenly taking the headlamp of a train as light at the end of the tunnel. Based on the history, when the GNU came in with Tendai Biti at the helm of the finance ministry, we saw an economic turnaround of the country within a very short space of time. We have seen Emmerson Mnangagwa in his 100-day speech. It was all speech, all promises. There was nothing that he did for the country of Zimbabwe. So currently, Zimbabwe is at an economic meltdown. And the people who are suffering is not the people in ZANU-PF, but is those who are within the country. The people, those in the community, are the ones who are suffering. And probably it's high time that the people of Zimbabwe put the matters into their own hands and change the situation in the country.
How is that possible, though? I mean, we've just gone through an election. Are you suggesting that they head towards civil disobedience so soon after heading to the ballot box?
Okay, what else could the Zimbabweans do? Like, for instance, the tobacco farmers, as soon as they went to sell their tobacco on the auction floors, they were told that the US dollar and the bond note was 1:1. As an example, a person gets $1,000 US, but then they were given that money in US bond, so you get 1,000 bond. Currently, it's no longer 1:1 because that fake currency that they're given to the people is no longer working. It's about 1:8, 1:6, you understand? So it means the value of the money that they had is gone. They no longer have the money. So it tells you that the government, the regime, has been there to kill, steal, and destroy. They've been stealing and looting.
So the more things change, the more they change, the more they stay the same.
Definitely.
And much of the same could be said for the lines of West Africa, Cameroon heading towards another election. I mean, Robert Mugabe, when he was still in power, could give Paul Biya a run for his money, but heading into almost his fourth decade as president, he's now after a 7th term.
Yes.
The Anglophone side of Cameroon is already talking about secession. The opposition leader is suggesting that he's won the election.
But winner.
For all intents and purposes, what is going to happen at the end of next week, though, as these results get verified?
First and foremost, if we look at democracy, governance, and human rights in Africa, I believe the type of democracy and governance that we are using is not compatible with African principles and ideologies. Back in the days, probably the issue of chieftainship was working better. Currently, we look at a person like Paul Biya, also probably look at a person like Robert Mugabe. They stay in power. They never want to leave power. Talking about succession is a political hot potato in Africa. You understand? So currently, the people of Cameroon, it is common cause that Paul Biya is still going to win the elections. At this day and age, we take about 15 days for them to release the election results. It must tell you that they're cooking up something, you understand? And Of course, they are definitely justified, the opposition members, to say we've won an election. I believe it's possibly because they are within that fraternity. They understand how the ruling party comes and steals the election, like is what happened in Zimbabwe. The election was stolen. But trying to regain that using any constitutional means does not work, because all those systems of governance are caught. They've been captured by the state. The same applies in Cameroon. We have seen that the Gini coefficients gap, the gap between the rich and the poor in Cameroon, has been increasing. The plight of the teachers in Cameroon has not been addressed, and Paul Biya is still in power and is living large.
So, Advocate Diamond, what reasonable hope for change are there on the ground in Cameroon? Or is this just going to be quite literally a seventh term for Paul Biya? Any opposition is going to be beaten down. And if we talk about the situation again next year, we'll talk about Paul Biya well into his seventh term.
He's definitely going to win this one. He's got this one in the bag because he's still in control, is in charge. He's got all the means of making that the result go in his favor. Look, if you talk about hope for Africa, I believe Africa does not have hope anymore. Without the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Nelson Mandela, the issue of the African Renaissance was going this way, and Africa is going on a totally different direction. So in terms of having hope for Africa, it's going to be a big ask as far as the politics of the country and the politics of the continent are involved, because the leaders now are no longer pulling in one direction. If you look at the regional bodies, look at the African Union, look at SADC. SADC and African Union, they just exchange chairmanships. They drink tea together and exchange chairmanships. In terms of putting a policy and a migration policy on the table, they don't do anything. They just meet and talk and put resolutions which they never come and implement.
So not enough action when there seems to be plenty of talk. We'll have to leave it at that. Advocate Tapiwa Diamond chatting to us about the situation not only in Zimbabwe, but also in the lines of Cameroon in West Africa.